Today on Music and Culture, we welcome pianist and composer Corey Cottle. Well, we're so happy today to welcome Corey Cottle to Music and Culture. He is a multi-talented musician, the best pianist that I know, a composer, a touring musician. He's currently on the road with Tyler Childers. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
I think you're coming down two miles from me at Ameris Bank here in Atlanta, June 8th. So,
Oh yeah, 2 days.
before we get into to Corey's incredible musicianship, I want to show you all how I met him because it was pretty fun. My son Hal was working with us then, and he booked you. So um, I I tuned into Facebook and met you for the first time with that video, uh, and then about 2 other million people did too, because that video went absolutely crazy, went viral. That's your dad there, right? Playing with you
That's
at camp.
Dad. Yep, that's Dad,
Yeah,
and he's got a extensive background, actually personally with Jerry Lee Lewis somewhat. So it's um, that
that's
boogie
pretty
stuff
cool.
kind of runs in the family a little bit.
Well, ever since then, I wanted to ask you a question, and that is, what makes the boogie woogie sound boogie woogie? Pretend that I'm a music composition student, and you're trying to explain to me the musical structure of boogie woogie, like what happens with the in the bass clef and treble clef, and how does it work?
In the time I've been doing this, nobody's asked me that, and I don't really have a prepared answer. But in just thinking about it right now, I think a lot of it, well, one, it's party music, it's dance music, and two,
Mm,
I think a lot of it starts in the left hand, and the left hand covering the role of drummers and bass players, and the left hand acting
mm.
is multiple instruments at once. I'm going to assume a lot of that originated from folks like Jerry Lee or his predecessors. There's always predecessors. There's a famous like and I attribute that to Jerry Lee Lewis, but he probably found it from somebody else. It's in a
Yeah,
lot of famous solos, some Stevie Ray Vaughan solos. Reese Winans did it, and I first was like, "Oh, that's a Reese Winans thing." But there's always somebody who.
right.
So I don't want to attribute those things just to Jerry Lee because there's probably a good chance that it comes from somewhere else. Um, but I think
So
that
what
it
does the
probably
left hand do? What is the left hand doing? Is it like a blues chord progression, or?
it's a major triad. So if you've ever had a basic piano lesson, we'll
Mm,
start in the key of C. So it's just a C chord, C E G, and then um, you could just do the three notes. Most people will add
mm.
a note at the end of it, C E G A, and then Jerry Lee would add a thumb with the octave. And I think the reason that connects with people is they're hearing subdivisions like a hi hat and a kick drum
Mm.
and a snare. You're getting the and you're getting that low boom
Right.
from the left hand, and then you're getting accents on 2 and 4 like you would a snare drum. So to me, really, you've got a melodic drum kit in your left hand, and that's what makes the boogie that iconic feel and flavor.
And what about the right hand? Show us a little more about what that does.
So that's where it becomes a party to me, and that's where I think it's extremely innovative, and that's where I think um, you start to get into modern rock and roll. Sometimes
Mm.
it's melodic, sometimes it's chordal, sometimes it's just athletic, sometimes it's just somebody who's drank so much beer that they're just ripping into the keys. But there are several iconic I don't want to say licks, but passages or ways of talking that are very familiar to boogie. One of them is it's very simple, and I think it's attracts folks because American music, well, all Western music, we're drawn to tension and release. And so I'll just take I've got the
Mm.
C major triad, and Jerry Lee would take it and he would put a minor third on top. So you got E natural and E flat on top, and then a G right here. So you got this all in one register. You got this really dissonant thing,
Mm.
and so when you're hearing it, it just makes you do that tense up just enough to want to hear it release. So when you follow a 12-bar blues pattern and you go to the 4 chord, in this case F, you get that release. The minor third becomes a dominant 7. So your chord goes from that to this. So the right hand gives you that tension and release and the added rhythms.
That is great. I love
I'm,
that.
I'm, I'm
Um,
out of practice. I've got a piano teacher somewhere being like, "Oh my gosh, what is going on?"
I doubt it. I doubt it. Um, one of the things I like to talk about with people is uh, how their musical ability first manifested itself. And I know from your bio that you grew up in a family with a lot of musical talent, which is true of a lot of musicians. You want to tell us about that, and then how at the age of 3 you sat down to the piano and started to compose symphonies like Mozart. I mean, I
Well,
imagine
I,
you were pretty good pretty early.
in a different way. And what makes my story and a lot of Appalachian folks' artist stories different from what you hear often with, we grew up in a musical family, parents were musicians. In our case, having grown up before social media made the world the smaller place that it is, we found that a lot of our musical traditions and roots were untouched for generations. So I had grandparents and traditions coming from great grandparents. With musical roots stemming from the Pentecostal church, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's about a step shy of snake handling. So you had people up and running around, shouting all this stuff. So you had to dig in, and um, so there's a rawness and a connection to spirituality back there that, details and stuff aside, the connection is very genuine, and that bleeds into music. Church is really one of the main things that are one of the only things that are left standing back in East Kentucky as far as community, and it's remote Appalachia, and church is what we have with each other. So music was just part of that common thread and that bond that we all shared. Whether you could sing or play or not, you were singing and playing. And
Yeah.
I was fortunate too that because I had not just musical parents, but because I had innovative parents and parents who were dead set on making sure East Kentucky kids had access to the same musical resources as kids in urban areas, I was able to combine that with um, some broader musical knowledge and musical experiences. I grew up around some wonderful jazz players in East Kentucky. I grew up around some phenomenal session musicians, really polished players with studio credits that I just wouldn't believe. And I assumed that because I was in East Kentucky, I could never go out and make it in Nashville or New York or wherever because, oh my gosh, if I'm trying to keep up with these guys right here and they're just up the holler, there's no way I can keep up. And come to find out, those guys were the ones playing on a lot of the records coming out of Nashville. So
Yeah.
my background comes from musical family, but it also comes from musical community in a very unique way. And then I was fortunate to be able to move to Nashville and couple that with a more formal music education. I did have some classical education in East Kentucky as well. That was a big thing that my parents were adamant about giving kids access to. Um,
Yeah.
but I really honed in on it in college, and it all kind of blended into what I hope is just a very natural way of compositions coming out. I rarely sit down and try to squeeze anything into a genre. There's just this blend of Appalachia and the things that I've fallen in love with throughout the years that um, seeps out into how I write music. I hope.
You, you were part of that Kentucky music scene as early as 11 years old, I think. Uh, what do you remember about sitting down to the piano for the first time? What happened uh, in your mind, in your fingers? Um, did it all just make sense to you? What's that like for those of us who, had piano lessons and never progressed very far? I'm always wondering what it was like, what it would be like to be gifted at it and have a very different experience.
That's a good. I think that my gift was largely the people who were around me, um, and
Mhm.
I was too young to remember the first experience at it. But I can't remember a time where it didn't feel natural. And I think everybody has something like that in their life where this is my comfort zone. This is how I'm uh, fully in touch with myself, and this whatever this is that I'm doing, whatever it is just an extension of me. So I've never known a piano to not feel like that. And the older I got, the more it became important to me to make sure that any idea I was hearing in my head could come out physically on the keys. I'm still working on it. My left hand is probably 10 years behind my right hand. So I'm trying to constantly, probably to the day I die, make sure that if I have an idea or um, whatever it is, if it's a composition or if it's in a solo piano piece, I want to make sure that those things can flow. My favorite musicians do that. Pat Metheny does that. I would never make a comparison between myself and him, but he sees himself as just this vehicle that things flow through. And I think as a musician, I always aspire to grow into that one day. Um, so it's probably like an athlete. Uh, when I played high school basketball and I was pretty good, but I never wanted the ball in my hands in crunch time. There are people who walk
Mhm.
out during that time and they're most comfortable, and that's when they thrive. Or it might be a business situation. It might be teaching, and you've got a student who's having a difficult time learning something, and that's when that teacher is their most comfortable, and that's when, without even thinking about it, they kick into who they are. So that's probably the best I could describe how a piano is to me.
Yeah, that's great. Was there ever a time when you had a classical music teacher who, I mean, I think your facility on the keyboard is astounding. Sort of was jealous of you for the classical world, and no,
that no, well, I still can't read music as good as I should be able to read music. So their focus was typically always on, okay, cool, but you really are going to want to be able to read these notes, and here's why. And
yeah,
they were right, um, but I was always uh, these were so far ahead of these,
uh,
and my ear was always so. If I do have a physical gift, it's perfect pitch. So I was able to, if I got my hands on a recording of the song, I would just learn it that way. And
yeah,
in hindsight, I didn't know I was depriving myself of a very valuable skill. But to audition, in college, you have to sight read pieces, or summer programs in high school, there's sight reading pieces. I would go outside um, the door while the other students were auditioning. I'd hear their pieces, and they would play something, and I'd be like, "That's got to be the sight reading piece." So I would just commit it here. And one time it backfired. I walked in, and they go, "Okay, now here's a piece. Will you sight read it?" And I played what the other kid played verbatim, and they go, "That's great. Now don't play what the kid before you played, and play this piece." and so nobody was ever. I didn't give anybody reason uh, to to be jealous of anything because I was always so weak in a very important area of it. And I think too that my approach to music was always more communal. I was always turned off from the get go at anything that was competitive in regards to music. I would get discouraged sometimes if somebody could do something that I couldn't do, and I would take it as a
Mhm.
challenge, but I would never see anything as competitive. And the older I got, the more I'm really just am disgusted by anything that's competition associated with making music.
Yeah. So you never wanted to be the star pianist jetting around the world from orchestra to orchestra. That was never Corey, was it?
I wanted to reach people on a global scale, and I
Yeah,
still do, and I'm still kind of conducting business with that in mind. But it's not for the sake of it being about me. I know how I've felt watching um, some of those iconic live concert or orchestral videos and concerts, and I never focused on the artist. It was always the notes and the music that just really resonated with me. So I'd like to do that, but no, I don't want to be a noted person. Um,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
not what it's
Uh,
about.
uh, One of the things that I've grown to love about your music, and this came about through a subsequent performance that you did for us for a Christmas concert where you played Silent Night. And you know, I have to be honest, my first reaction was, "Oh my gosh, how many times have we heard Silent Night?" Um, and then I heard your performance of Silent Night, and it was as if I had never heard that song before. It was so moving and fresh. And I want the audience to have an experience of that. We have a video of you playing Over the Rainbow, uh, and I'm going to put that up. Just before I do, I want people to understand that this is a solo effort by Corey, but he's in the midst of a session, so there are other musicians around him. But for right now, you're not going to hear the other musicians. You will later, uh, but for right now, we're just going to hear Corey play Over the Rainbow.
Thank you. I've never actually listened to that all the way through.
Um, what I love about your arrangements is that you really are guided by the melody and the inherent possibilities that you sense in it. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, I used to not be as conscious of those things as I should have been, especially in college when you're really expanding your vocabulary and learning these things from an academic level. Is you forget, at least I forgot to separate the academics from the fact that somebody wrote this song um, because it meant something to them. And so for me, it's not just the melody; it's the lyrics. And even as uh, an instrumentalist, I try to make sure that if I'm covering a vocal song, um, and a lot of great musicians will emphasize you got to know the lyrics before you play this song. But I try to make sure that what I'm playing and how I'm playing it um, is respectful and mindful of what those lyrics are, and I try to understand what those lyrics might have meant to the person who wrote them. And something that country music has always taught me is space, and especially from a piano player, there's a natural want to do more or to fill space because it can feel empty and it can feel
Mm.
um, like something is supposed to be happening when it's not. And it took somewhat of an epiphany. It took a great musician, a fellow by the name of Chester Thompson. He's a drummer. If you're not familiar with him, I always tell folks it's worth googling him. He's probably in his mid late 70s now, but he's one of the most influential drummers in American music history, and he's also an educator. And we were working on something one time, and I said, Chester, do you mind if I use this loop for something else that I'm working on? And he said, why are you asking me? Those notes aren't mine. I just borrowed them. And from there, I realized that the notes are enough. You know, what if you're playing Silent Night or Over the Rainbow, those simple just I didn't make those notes. I think that God made them. Other people might connect them to something else spiritually, and those are enough. And they deserve their space sometimes. And I think so often we hear these songs, and folks can put so much emphasis on it being their own spin on them that we forget that there's a reason this melody is popular. There's a reason these lyrics are popular, and we can get so disconnected with what made them connect with people in the first place. We make our own arrangements and stuff. So for me, I try to completely forget about the fact that it's my own arrangement or that I need to do something to make this one different, and I just
Mhm.
play it in a way that connects with me because that melody is good enough. Those notes are good enough, and I try to stay out of their way. Or in Over the Rainbow, um, that song was personal to me for a lot of reasons. And as I've gone on tour doing these concerts, I've realized it's personal to a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. So there's
Mhm.
parts in that arrangement where it does get big and it gets tense, and there's a little bit of anger in there. There's a little bit of
Mhm.
confusion, and to me, there's that exists in the lyrics. So if I'm making an arrangement, I'm not trying to think of okay, here's where it might get confusing. Here's what I where I can do this. I just try to know the song enough to where those things come out naturally.
Yeah, there's a lot of yearning in that song.
A
Uh,
lot. Yeah.
yeah. Let's talk about one of the major projects that you've been involved with, the concert for the human family. How did that come about? What's it about, and how has it evolved?
So when um, I just released a record um, on Naxos. It's called Tree Life, and I was navigating this weird thing we call the music industry and a solo career on top of being a sideman for a different country artist and working in the studio. And a friend of mine who works in the communications department at the Episcopal Church had spoken with one of his colleagues, and I had no idea that I didn't grow up in the Episcopal Church. I didn't even know how to pronounce it properly, and probably still don't. And they were very conscious of how these gorgeous spaces that they have all throughout the world are becoming less and less used and less visited. And that church is also kind of leading other denominations in being aware of areas in which the church might have hurt folks throughout the years, or where the church could do a better job of bringing people together. And so they were looking at all those things, and they said, well, what if we just had events in these spaces that was meant for everybody? Everybody loves music. What if we had music that was tailored for these events? And then if people feel inspired after, that's great. There's projects and initiatives that we're doing, and we're happy to let people know about that. But let's invite everybody into these spaces, because they're so spiritual in nature, regardless of your religious affiliation. And wouldn't it be great if folks, we know we can go to a concert hall and come away with a good feeling. What if you put that in St. Bart's Church in downtown Manhattan, or in the little old country church in Iowa, and you put the same music in there? People are going to leave feeling something, and that community should feel a little tighter and motivated to just be better to each other. And we started with that in mind, and from there, I reached out to some collaborators, some folks that I was a fan of, some folks that I was already working with, and Wordsmith was one of those. He and I met backstage at a country event at a military base. He was on the bill because they were having artists from multiple genres, and we never got to work with the hip hop artists at the show. And I just fell in love with how he delivers music. His cadences are so unique. His topics are so atypical for that genre. Beyond that, come to find out, he's got a symphonic background. He's an educated actor. He's an ex college athlete. We had all these things in common, and on the surface, their music was so different. But when you get just that far below the surface, there were so many common threads there. And we always wanted to make music together. And the more I'd grown to know him as a person, and us to really just become like brother. I'm an only child, so I don't use the term brother lightly. It was important to me before this project came up that I make music in a way that offers him a platform to share some of his experiences if he wants to. Because the folks who have followed my music at that point to date were probably coming from a completely different audience demographic than his, and I wanted him to feel welcome and loved and have that space in there. So when we found out that a lot of what the Episcopal Church was doing was rooted in racial reconciliation and really just an extension of Dr. King's efforts, it's been neat seeing reactions. It's been neat seeing folks come up to us and say, I haven't been into a church in 20 years, but I came today because I like piano music, and I felt a brotherly love that I haven't experienced in a long time, and I'll be back next Sunday.
Well, I think that's so wonderful that this is a time of such division where race is often used in terms of class structure and oppressor and oppressed, and certainly slavery was America's original sin, and the legacy of that endures. But as Dr. King said, we're all working towards a day where people are judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, and to come together in our God-given common humanity. So let's let the audience experience some of that. Here's I Pray.
I pray for the mountains, and I pray for the rain, and I pray for the people. I pray to ease the pain. I pray for purpose.
purpose, for a passion, for the marching that we start and when it's time to take action. For the souls, for the sick, for the lives that we lost at the cost of this mission. For the kids, for the crisis, for the knowledge we acknowledge that we gotta live righteous. For the mission, for religion, for the black lives lost at the cost of the system.
I pray for the mountains, and I pray for the rain, and I pray for the people. Lord, I pray to ease the pain. I pray
for the sinners, for the winners, for the love of all genders, to my military members. For the weak, for the strong, for my independent women, to my birth-giving moms. For the mountains, for the rain, for the sun, for the things that'll take away the pain. For the teachers, for the leaders, for the speakers, with a message that'll make us all believers. Willing to push aside the hate, the jealousy, and the envy, and form one family of love. Don't be afraid to give somebody a hug and tell someone that you love them. So repeat after me. Amen.
You know, my dad was a Baptist preacher. And after that, I'm sure he would have said to his congregation, And all the people said, Amen. I want to pick up on that just a little bit more as we end here. And Corey, it's been interesting getting to know you through these videos and our minimal but very meaningful contacts over the last few years. And I've always had this strong sense of you, but we've never really talked about it, that you don't pursue music just as a profession. It's a calling for you. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying so. It's somewhat hard to talk about because um, I think in the last couple of years I've kind of come to a realization that um, with modern technology and being able to get the word out about things, I kind of feel like I've just become a voice for past generations and for other people, other musicians who've come before me from my home region and in my family. Um, I saw how my grandmother used music to strengthen her community, and it was during when things were segregated. She would not allow her church to be segregated. It was for people who, you know, folks of color were coming into their church and singing all the time, and you would have never known that stuff was going on. And she was able to heal people. And at her funeral, uh, folks were coming up to me left and right, and they were saying things that, if you aren't familiar with the area and if you weren't familiar with her, you would say, okay, well, that's just that's cool. They're trying to find something nice to say, but people would say things like, "Now your grandmother would play, and we called it playing in the spirit, and she played piano, and there would be harp sounds coming out and cellos coming out of it and everything." And I'm thinking, well, Granny was hip. She probably had a keyboard and had some patches pulled up where there was orchestra things going on. But the more you know her and the more I look at it and I go, well, maybe they were. Maybe that was happening. Who am I to decide what? I, so to me, the calling is this music thing puts us in touch with something that our society is forgetting, and in touch with something that we're constantly losing touch of. And things like how it helps us heal, things like how it helps us enjoy moments even more. I feel like every life experience has a song attached to it for us. And my favorite thing that's happening right now is if there's a calling, I feel like what Wordsmith and I are doing is, and this isn't to try and equate us with something that's bigger than it is, but I've found that the more in depth I go, it's merging, it's merging Western music and African music. And I look at what he's doing with the symphony. He will rewrite pieces from an urban perspective, or he'll play um, Biggie songs with the Baltimore Symphony, and they're arranged beautifully, and there's people bouncing in there. And as I promise I'm going somewhere with it, but as my email inbox is constantly flooded from symphonies asking for donations because people aren't going, I think it's because we as Americans have experienced African rhythms. We've experienced the beats and stuff that come from Wordsmith's ancestors that are not present in European classical music. And that is a vital part of music and how we enjoy music. So I look at my grandmother and the way they would just play cymbals. They didn't have instruments, so they would play cymbals sometimes. And those were passed down to her from her African American colleagues. And to me, I think music is starting to become experienced the way that um, it was meant to be experienced, with beats, with these rhythms, because we're creatures of rhythm to begin with. And you put that with these gorgeous melodies that we study in school over here in America, and these harmonies, and all the great classics, Beethoven, Mozart, um, imagine hearing those, but also feeling those pulses that resonate so just naturally within us. So to me, I think the calling is um, trying to take what little time I've got on here and playing a small part in furthering this gift that God gave us that we're always trying to understand. And it's always reminding us that there's something bigger at play than just ourselves.
Thank you, Corey. Everyone catch Corey Cottle as often and as soon as you can. And you can hear him in the band with Tyler Childers, but also tune in with Spotify and all the other music services and listen to his own music, which is just fantastic. So thank you, Corey. It's wonderful to see you today.
You too. Thank you for having me. We'll hope to catch you down south in Atlanta.